Cornwall isn't just one of the windiest places in Europe. It's also blessed with sun, geothermal heat, and the awesome power of the sea. Cornwall had the UK's first ever commercial wind and solar farms, and today it has the potential to help drive the whole country's clean energy revolution. But there's a problem. Britain's ageing electricity grid isn't able to cope with the renewable power we could generate here. And meanwhile, huge numbers of people in Cornwall can't even afford to heat their homes.
My name's Lucy Cotton, and this is my climate story. I'm a surfer. I love that feeling of being in nature, surrounded by our beautiful coastline and wildlife. It really is food for the soul. I also love my job. I'm a geologist. My work involves looking at rocks deep beneath our feet and harnessing the heat from them. It's a really exciting field to be in, but the hot rocks I work with are only going to be part of the low carbon energy future we need to help us fight climate change. So I want to take a look at what else is going on in Cornwall and find out how we can move away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible while still keeping the lights on.
There are homes I can show you that Dickens would recognise. We still have that level of poverty in parts of Cornwall.
We're still farmers and we still want to produce food. We're generating electricity from the sun and we're producing nutrient-dense quality meat. It's kind of a win-win, really.
People can sit in front of a lovely fire and have a glass of wine. You can't do that with an air source heat pump so easily.
Piers Guy lives on a remote farm near Land's End, but his career as a renewable energy consultant has taken him all over the world. Back in 2009, he appeared in the cult movie Age of Stupid, which starred Pete Postlethwaite as the last man on a future Earth, asking why we didn't act on climate crisis while we still had the chance.
We could have saved ourselves, but we didn't. It's amazing. What state of mind were we in to face extinction and simply shrug it off?
The film documented Piers' real-life efforts to develop a wind farm in the Midlands. His story illustrates the challenges that renewables have faced in the UK and how the whole country's hopes of tackling the climate crisis have come to rest so heavily on Cornwall.
We chose the site originally because it was a US air base in the Second World War, so it wasn't a sort of idyllic piece of English countryside. One of the runways had been turned into a drag racing strip, the self-proclaimed noisiest sport in the world. I thought that that would probably be quite a good place to have a wind farm. However, a lot of the locals didn't agree. In the end, it was about concerns over the effects it might have on house prices and people's views. It's nice to have a view, but the bigger picture here is that if we're going to try and halt climate change, or at least slow it down, we absolutely have to move away from fossil fuels. The majority of people aren't opposed to this stuff. Majority of people aren't. It's a small amount of people that can be very well organised and are very vocal. Even if they don't stop the project, they delay it. We started off with 17 turbines, so quite a big site. It was nearly 10 years just to get the planning, and it was for 3 turbines.
But if Piers had been attempting this project just a few years later, things would have been even more frustrating. Because while onshore wind is by far the cheapest and quickest way of boosting renewable energy generation, it has been effectively banned in England since 2015. Last year, Ukraine, a country at war, installed more turbines than we did.
Just at the point where we really need to continue the momentum, it got stopped. And a lot of that was to do with the pressure the government was under from these opposition groups. The change that occurred was you had to prove that you had local support for the project. Theoretically, you only need to get one person to object, and then you couldn't prove that you had local support. So it really became too risky for developers to continue to do it. It was a huge blow to the industry.
This also created a conundrum, because the UK now has legally binding targets to reach net zero by 2050, as part of wider global efforts to avoid irreversible climate breakdown. Getting to net zero means quickly cutting fossil fuel use to a point where any emissions can be reabsorbed by natural systems like forests and oceans. The UK has already achieved a lot by phasing out coal-fired power stations, but even so, we are still way off target. Overhauling our energy system is going to be absolutely key because the power used in our homes and industry across the country still accounts for well over a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. With onshore wind out of the picture, a big part of the UK's net zero hopes now rest on something that will soon be coming to the North Cornish coast. Neil Farrington works for a council-owned company aiming to ensure that Cornwall gets the maximum benefit from it. Crucially, although it's huge, this development won't affect anybody's view.
Floating wind is a very new sector that's really evolved very rapidly over the last 2 to 3 years. The Celtic Sea is the third biggest floating wind market in the whole of the world, and you're talking about 30–40% of the entire country's electricity supply coming from the Celtic Sea in the future. To give you an indication of scale, Cornwall's biggest current wind farm, we currently have 2 megawatt turbines, whereas the floating wind turbines will be looking at about 15 megawatts. Blade tip height starts to now stretch up to about 300 metres. Most of the development is looking at going 45 kilometres plus from the coastlines across Cornwall, Devon and the south coast of Wales. So these will be very big industrial structures, but they won't be visible from the shoreline.
Global renewables companies will soon start bidding to build this giant development. This will mean rapidly manufacturing, transporting and assembling around 300 turbines, each with blades the length of 10 double-decker buses. As it spins, each blade will also have to withstand a force equivalent to 20 African elephants. The turbines will sit on floating platforms bigger than football pitches, each anchored to the sea floor in water depths of over 50 metres.
We're likely to see it being developed and constructed later on in the 2020s, with completion and new power connection by 2035. We're currently looking at a production rate of about 1.5 platforms and turbines deployed per week, and that forms huge challenges. Currently our ports aren't big enough, their quayside depths aren't deep enough. Also how we get these installations out to site, how they're maintained, how they're operated, how they're potentially decommissioned. Working in the sea is challenging.
Despite these challenges, this offshore power station will ultimately provide plentiful, clean, cheap energy to the southwest, with the first phase alone powering over 7 million homes. It will also bring investment and jobs. But the scale of the site means it will impact some types of fishing, although there may be potential to grow different foods, such as seaweed and shellfish, between the turbines. And this is only one of the concerns.
One of the key considerations relates to seabirds. Some of the really sensitive species like storm petrels, we don't understand where they fly between Cornwall and Wales. We are also just completing an airborne survey to better understand bird flight height. Lots of diving species don't fly above 20 metres. If the base of your turbine rotor diameter is 60 to 100 metres up in the air, the collision risk is going to be very, very low. So we're looking at anchoring systems and how the noise of those installations can affect different species. So we minimise impacts. We're putting out loads of underwater microphones so we can understand how dolphins speak. And as soon as we can hear them, we then know what species they are and what they're doing.
Detailed environmental groundwork like this is essential before any turbines are built in such a sensitive habitat. But it's also worth remembering that the bigger threat to seabirds and most other wildlife is climate change, not wind turbines. There are other questions about wind energy's green credentials though.
Renewable energy has got its own footprint. One needs to look at what energy has been embedded in the manufacturing and construction of these projects, where have the raw materials come from, and how sustainable is that supply chain. We need to make sure that it's completely recyclable. The turbines can mostly be recycled. The only thing that historically couldn't be recycled were the blades. They're made of fiberglass, and that's really hard to recycle. But the industry has innovated in creating a different type of epoxy that can actually be broken down and recycled. Today, there's a lot of environmental protection involved in projects. It's very highly regulated, actually. When we consider new renewable energy projects, we look at the impact. But the bigger picture here is that we are facing a threat to our future like none other. We need to make sure that this transition happens, and we need to lead that as best we can. And we often forget that there is a huge impact of using fossil fuels. Most of the energy that we consume today is imported from other parts of the world. We don't see any of the exploitation, the pollution to the environment. People are dying from respiratory illnesses and cancers. We're just happy to consume their fuel, and that is not a situation we should be proud of.
The floating offshore wind potential is incredible.
But shouldn't we be doing more to harness the huge amount of energy beaming down on us much closer to home? You might not believe it if you're standing in the Cornish Mizzle, but we are far enough south here to keep generating solar energy even in the winter.
Some of our large solar farms produce enough energy to power tens of thousands of homes. But this is increasingly becoming an area of conflict too. To future-proof against climate shocks, we will need to grow more of our own food locally, and Cornwall Council has recently turned down planning applications for some large solar arrays, partly due to fear of losing productive farmland. Farmer Anthony Ellis has found a solution to some of these concerns, simply by raising the panels covering 35 acres of his land up slightly higher than usual.
You know you're going to get the argument that you can't produce food. Well, you can. It offers the sheep shade in the summer, shelter in the winter. They happily lamb under it. They really see the panels as an area of refuge and protection. We don't have problems with rooks and crows because they don't go under the panels to attack newborn lambs. We've found that the grass tends to grow better under the panels than not. As soon as you get a heat event like we're having now, where we've had no rainfall in a month, the grass will hold on better under the panels than it does out in the open. I've seen lots of other systems where people have got chickens under panels, where people grow veg between the rows. It's perfectly doable. If you go through Europe, there's a whole industry based around producing food around solar panels. We're generating electricity from the sun, and we're producing nutrient-dense quality meat, so we've sort of got the best of both worlds.
Thinking laterally like this makes so much sense. But many of the huge field arrays we see locally belong to foreign investment funds, which have no interest in combining energy and food production and siphon their profits out of Cornwall. I would love to see much more solar on rooftops, especially big buildings like schools, barns and industrial units. But many roofs in Cornwall are in conservation areas, face the wrong direction or aren't sturdy enough. And the incentive to install solar fell away after 2015, when the government slashed the feed-in tariff that had previously provided attractive payments for the energy produced. This halted a boom that had seen the organisation Community Power Cornwall help local energy groups set up 28 renewables projects. One of them was this solar array powering a sewage plant.
You may be able to hear the pumps. They run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The sewage plant requires a significant amount of energy. Weybridge is a special place. We have a real community strong will to try and limit our impact on the planet. The BBC did an article on us. They worked out that 1 in every 10 houses in Weybridge has solar panels on it. So per capita, we generated more solar energy than any other small town in the whole of the UK. Historically, Weybridge used to have its own generator that provided all of the power for the local area in the early 1900s. And we kind of wanted to turn the clock back 120 years to get back to that point where we could have more control on our energy. So we're not, relying on gas coming from Russia or, interconnections from other European countries. We could be a bit more resilient.
Even without the feed-in tariff, Wren had hoped to install more community-owned energy generation to make the town more self-sufficient. But it's been stymied by the massive problem facing so many new energy projects in Cornwall today, our national grid. The UK's power distribution network was designed 100 years ago to deliver a stable, predictable flow of electricity from coal-fired power stations in the centre of the country. But it's been struggling to cope with more and more fluctuating energy now coming back the other way from renewables installations in places at the end of the line, like Cornwall. When it's very sunny or windy, many renewable generators are actually forced to switch off to avoid overloading the system. This can happen up to 80% of the time. The government is planning to nationalise part of the national grid to help improve strategic decision making for the whole country. But right now, most renewables projects in Cornwall aren't likely to get connected until 2036.
It's really challenging to then find out, yeah, you can do it, but you've got to wait 10 years before you can do it. Or it's going to cost you a lot more money than somebody else, in another county who've got a much better kind of grid infrastructure. That kind of takes the wind out of people's sails.
So Wren decided to explore other ways of making Wadebridge more energy self-sufficient. One idea was to use all the renewable energy produced locally within the town, instead of sending it off into the grid.
People who have perhaps solar panels on their homes, they're not in all day because they're at work and it's just generating and it's just going straight out to the grid because they don't need it. But their next door neighbour might be somebody who's elderly, who is at home, who has got electric heating. The idea is that one neighbour can sell their energy to the other.
Using energy in the place where it's generated could be a great solution to Cornwall's grid constraints, and there are examples of peer-to-peer energy trading systems like this already operating all over the world, from Bangladesh to Brooklyn. But the huge costs and the red tape involved in doing anything like this in the UK put it way beyond the reach of local communities like Wadebridge. For now, Wren is focusing on developing other projects, such as a powerful online tool allowing councils and energy groups to model their local areas and work out how best to cut their emissions. The tool has been used all over the country, and it highlights a huge elephant in the room, because electricity is only one part of the energy challenge we face. The UK has the most poorly insulated homes in Europe. The energy that leaks out as we try to heat them doesn't just result in expensive bills. It's also a significant cause of our greenhouse gas emissions. Tim Jones is the Chief Executive of Community Energy Plus, which offers home visits, energy advice and support to thousands of people around Cornwall.
Got some very affluent parts of Cornwall, very nice homes, but when we get below the surface, a lot of homes that are damp, hard to heat, moisture running down the walls. Something like 20% of homes in Cornwall are struggling to afford to keep themselves adequately warm. That means about 50,000 homes. I have homes that we've gone to that have scored a G1, which is the lowest energy performance certificate, which basically means it's not retaining heat at all. If you're living in a damp environment, it's going to have an impact on your health. And increasingly, not only how do we keep homes warm, but how do we keep them cool? What we've been seeing with heat waves is older people become much more vulnerable if they can't manage the heat that's coming into their home. Probably at least 60% of Cornish homes need to have some sort of treatment to make them more thermally efficient. About 15% of heat loss goes through windows and doors. About a quarter goes through the roof space, about 15% down through the floors, and then about 35% out through the walls. A lot of people don't recognise heat escaping through the walls is the major issue about heat loss.
Cornwall Council has recently published new development standards to ensure that all new housing is properly insulated to prevent this huge wastage of energy.
But the numbers of homes that are being built compared to the number existing is quite tiny. We have 280,000 homes already occupied in Cornwall, and for me the key thing is that we need to enable the retrofit of our existing stock, and that means looking particularly at external wall insulation. You can then use the fabric of the building as something of a heat store, so that heat will go into the walls but then reflect back into the rooms and not escape out into the environment. Although I'm passionate about campaigning for external wall insulation for a typical 3-bed semi-house, that's going to cost at least 20, if not £25,000 to install, just because of the complexities of it, talking about someone working on site for a couple of weeks. It's not just something that someone can come along and do a DIY job. If I had a magic wand, it would be a funding stream that enabled us to do external wall insulation at scale on an area street by street approach. We've got a lot more work to do to provide homes that are fit for 2050 and beyond.
It's a huge challenge, but Cornwall has an incredible superpower, because it is the best place in the whole country for something that could ultimately provide many of us with low-cost, fossil fuel-free heat direct from the earth, This is what I'm working on.
Cornwall's got a really unique geology. It's underlain by this massive granite called the Cornubian batholith, which is a very cool name. That granite is hot, but within the granite we have lots of fractures, which is where we have fluid circulating around, and that's what we're using for geothermal energy.
This fluid is a mixture of groundwater and water that's been circulating underground for millions of years.
There's just a lot of water down there. We're at Eden Geothermal, and during this project we have drilled 5,276 metres down into the Earth's crust to find a fault zone, and in the fault is hot water. This is the pipe that is pulling the water out of the well, this one here, and you can see temperature is 74 degrees. We're using it to heat the Eden biomes and a greenhouse that's growing food for the cafe. The wells that have been drilled in Cornwall are the deepest onshore wells in the UK. The great thing about geothermal is the deeper you go, the hotter it gets. So you know that you're going to get the temperature that you need. And the Earth's crust here in Cornwall is up to 35 kilometres deep, and we're going to 5 kilometres. So we're just scratching the surface in terms of the potential that lies beneath our feet. Drilling deep wells is really, really exciting because you're seeing things that no one's ever seen before, and particularly in this area, which is a hugely mineral-rich area, we're discovering things that are new every day. Geothermal energy is what we call a baseload power, so it doesn't rely on the weather or daylight, so it's available 24 hours a day, which is wonderful. It's not the answer to all of our energy needs, but it's definitely part of the energy mix that really needs to be considered for Cornwall.
As well as helping to tackle fuel poverty in homes around Cornwall, geothermal energy could be used to heat greenhouses, letting us grow more food locally as climate change starts to affect imports. It could also power industries requiring heat, with one startup already looking to produce the world's first carbon-neutral geothermally distilled rum. The wells drilled so far at Eden and United Downs are just the beginning. There are planning applications for a further 5 geothermal sites across Cornwall, and with enough investment, the potential could be much, much larger. Half an hour's drive further west, the heat beneath our feet is being harnessed in quite a different way. Cornish company Kenza has grown from a tiny operation working out of a garage to become the country's biggest producer of ground source heat pumps. Now, it hopes its project in the village of Stithians could revolutionise the carbon footprint of home heating across the entire country.
The energy that we harvest with our heat pumps comes from the surface, whereas the deep geothermal, it really is energy from the molten core of the Earth, and they're two really quite different things. We can harvest energy from as little as 1 metre below the surface successfully all year round by pumping cold fluid around a circuit of pipes. We might send the water out at 5 degrees from the heat pump and it comes back at 10 degrees. And that 5 degrees of temperature difference, the ground source heat pump is able to extract that energy, squeeze it, elevate its temperature and deliver that energy into your house for heating or hot water. You can put a heat pump in any building and heat it. If the designer's right, it will work. It isn't a compromise. It will achieve exactly the same heating results that a fossil fuel boiler will achieve. What there is a huge carbon emissions saving.
Unlike air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps are installed inside a house, so they avoid problems like rust and condensation, which can be a big issue in our damp Cornish climate. And once installed, they are cheaper to run too. But they do have one big drawback.
To put in a ground source heat pump system is probably double what it would cost to put an air source heat pump in. The majority of the cost is the work to put this pipe in the ground. It's not actually the cost of the heat pump.
But Kenza's groundbreaking work in Stithians means all this could be about to change.
The goal is to lay pipes in streets which provide an easy, available connection to the homeowner for their ground source heat pump, so they don't have all the disruption and mess and cost of installing the ground array infrastructure themselves. The whole basis of the project was to prove that it is possible to lay a network of pipes in a street, to provide a connection for every house, just like you have water mains and gas mains currently. In many ways, it's the same as the gas network was 40, 50, 60 years ago. They laid the gas in the streets. Not all the customers came at once. It took several decades for everybody to adopt central heating. It's a demonstration for the outside world and, in a way, inviting the customers to come when their gas boiler goes wrong. Traditionally, the only choice they would have is to buy a new gas boiler. But now, actually, we can offer you a heat pump instead.
Rolling this kind of infrastructure out in big cities could have a fast and significant climate impact, but switching to renewable heating systems, whether digging up roads to lay ground source heat arrays or installing air source heat pumps, is going to be a massive task. The government has a target of 600,000 heat pumps being installed per year by 2028. Last year, we managed just over 70,000. The problem is, there's a huge lack of people trained in the new skills needed to do this work. Is it actually necessary for everyone to switch to a heat pump though? Most of Cornwall isn't connected to mains gas, and about 40,000 homes here, a higher proportion than anywhere else in the country, use even more polluting forms of heating, like oil boilers. Cornish company Mitchell & Webber is running Europe's largest trial in the use of non-toxic hydro-treated vegetable oil made from waste cooking oil. It's a quick and easy swap that produces 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than kerosene.
We don't have to have our central heating system ripped up. There's no other changes other than the simple changes on the pump. And the only difference really is that instead of having a tank full of kerosene, we've now got a tank full of fossil-free fuel. And for us, that will probably save in the order of about 5 tonnes of carbon, of CO2 per year. And there's about a third of the village has now been converted, including the school, the horticultural centre, and really it's happened very, very quickly. This is part of the mix. I think it's got a great application for not just for us and in Keyhelen, but across the rural communities of Cornwall and probably the wider country as well. And that's why I think it's really exciting that this trial in Keyhelen is setting the standards for the whole of the UK. This is the low-hanging fruit. This is the easy win. And we can go and do this right now. The gains which we can make in the next 20 years will be absolutely enormous. This is such a good solution. It's hard to understand why the government hasn't been more forthright in supporting it.
When you think of the amount of energy that will be needed to produce and power thousands of new heat pumps in coming years, this project seems like a common-sense option for places like Keyhelen. The challenges ahead of us mean we'll need to embrace a range of energy solutions, especially as Cornwall, like many other local councils, is aiming to get to net zero by 2030, 20 years earlier than the national government target. There are still many unknowns about how we'll actually get there, and Cornwall Council is now trying to fill in some of the blanks by becoming the first rural authority in England to draw up a local area energy plan.
The Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Local Area Energy Plan is looking at how can we gain better energy security from what we can produce here locally. For example, if we have more electric vehicles on the road in Cornwall, where does that energy come from? How is it generated? The information that's collated will enable us to make the case to government around what's needed and identify where we need to bring in additional support. We're all concerned about our cost of living. I think the wider discussion around energy and what happens in the future can make people feel uncertain, thinking that they might be forced to change the way they insulate their homes or the way they heat their homes. We understand that in making change there are costs, and those additional costs will be seen by many as potentially being a burden for them. How are they going to do this? The plan is not about imposing things, but what might be needed to help people. It's about pulling all that information together and understanding how we can make that change and over what time. I think it's a real opportunity being able to develop the first rural energy plan. You can develop new business opportunities, you can skill up people within the local community to fulfil some of the new jobs, the new green jobs that will be needed to help us transition, and that's all really positive for Cornwall.
Globally, we still shell out more on subsidising the oil and gas industry than we spend on education. Even so, it's now 10 times cheaper to produce energy from renewables than fossil fuels. So rethinking our energy system won't just reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, it could also give us cheaper bills and shield us from the huge fluctuations in global oil and gas prices. It's great that Cornwall is getting ahead of the game in working out what's required. Over 85% of respondents to Cornwall's local area energy plan survey say they are worried about the climate crisis and support renewables. But not everyone can afford a heat pump, and you might have to wait a while to improve your home insulation. So what else can you do as an individual that's a bit more manageable? Just a few years ago, Karen Laborde had a super high octane life as the boss of a global skiing company, but she's been on a mission to dramatically reduce her energy footprint.
I had a very good income. I flew all over the world regularly. You can see how beautiful the areas we worked in were. Heli-skiing basically is a rich man's pursuit. The helicopter will collect maybe about 8 people, and then at the top of the mountain you put your skis on and a guide will take you down the mountain through all the best powder. It is one of those bucket list adventures, isn't it? But you can also see the high carbon in getting these people up and down a hill.
But back home in Cornwall, Karen was starting to clean up her local beach, and worrying about plastic pollution led her to question her whole lifestyle. Today, she is a Green Party councillor. She holidays by train instead of flying, has given up eating meat, slashed her bills by house sharing with her daughter's family, and is returning the land around her house to nature. But her main learning has been that we can all have more power than we think, if we stop thinking of energy only as something that comes out of a switch on the wall or a petrol pump.
Everything we use, we consume, is made using energy. Everything. From plastic toys, to cars, to carpets, to shampoos, from a piece of furniture, to food even. These can all be produced overseas, in places like China, where something ridiculous like 8 coal-fired power stations a month are being created because they need to produce all this stuff so that we can consume it here in the West. So every year our carbon emissions go up because we're using fossil fuels just in what we use round about the house. The more you grow the economy, the more you consume. The more we're encouraged to buy is actually making the problem worse. We need to just use less. We need to buy less. Once you release from buying, it's so much easier. I don't need the newest technology. I'm fitter, I go everywhere on my little bike. I don't have to pay parking charges. I know I'm privileged because I'm probably of the middle class. It's those middle class people who are doing the most damage, who can make the biggest changes. I don't feel I've lost anything. It's actually improved my quality of life. I wish I'd known this earlier.
In the UK, consumption of things like industrially farmed food, cheap foreign holidays, and fast fashion has doubled in my lifetime alone. The combined impact of billions of us living this way today is wrecking not just the climate, but also the ecosystems we all depend on for our survival. Deep down, I think we all know this can't go on. Living in a more locally self-sufficient way isn't always easy to imagine. Maybe we could take some inspiration from the past, when we not only did a lot less shopping, but many homes relied on a totally homegrown and sustainable energy source.
People think trees die when you fell them. Actually, you cut the trees down, you use that wood, and the trees just get on with it and grow back, and you can cut them again. All of our ancient woodlands in Cornwall have been managed through coppicing. The trees regrow quite quickly. It suddenly becomes a green space full of life again. We have stools here that the above ground stem dates from the last coppice, like the root system, could be thousands of years old. Coppicing stopped for a multitude of reasons. It required a large skilled workforce, and then also the introduction of oil, gas and electricity meant that woodlands went from being absolutely fundamental resources of energy to places that were neglected and poorly understood. The reason why we set Working Woodlands Cornwall up was because Britain is a poorly wooded country with the second largest net importer of wood in the world. China's the first. Lots of people are buying firewood and it's coming from Eastern Europe, and that has a really big impact. We're importing tree diseases. It's carbon heavy because it's being moved on ships. We've got a local resource of firewood that's keeping people warm, and it also replaces other fuel that has got a higher carbon footprint, oil, gas and coal. If you're burning wood, you're not using those. You're only releasing the carbon that wood has stored during its growing period, and as you're burning it, it's growing back again. When we start to manage our woods, especially techniques like coppicing, the growth rate really increases, and so the amount of carbon being sucked out of the air increases. So it's a win-win, really.
Using locally coppiced wood wouldn't be practical on a large scale, but it could work for older houses that have chimneys but would need a lot of retrofitting work to be made suitable for a heat pump.
Cornwall's traditional heritage could offer other low-carbon heating options too. Cornwall has hundreds of abandoned tin mines, and after they were abandoned, the workings were flooded, and now that water is being heated by the surrounding rocks. We're at Geevil in West Penwith, and we're working on a project here to use that hot water to heat the Geevil Mine Museum and local social housing. We've done the initial stage of feasibility, and we've sent cameras and data loggers down to 420 metres down Victory Shaft. We recorded 24 degrees, which is perfect for low-level district heating for houses. So this would be the first mine water geothermal project from tin mines in the UK, which is really exciting, but it also poses quite a lot of problems because it's not been done before. But the next stage of the project will be to have a look at some of the technical detail and work out how we can do it financially. It's a really good example of a collaborative community project that can use a natural resource for the benefit of the local people.
Cornwall's old mines will likely soon play another important role too, because many of the minerals mined here in the past will be crucial for the batteries, cables and other infrastructure needed as we switch to renewables. For copper alone, we're going to need as much in the next 25 years as we've mined in the whole of previous human history. We're finding lithium and other minerals dissolved in the briny waters coming out of our deep geothermal wells, and lithium can also be extracted from the huge slag heaps of China clay waste in the Cornish Alps. Modern techniques mean we can mine elements like these in Cornwall in much less environmentally damaging ways than other places around the world we currently source them from.
If you consider what's available in the UK from critical minerals, without Cornwall you really got nothing. In Cornwall there still is a lot of interest, excitement, nostalgia for mining. Cornwall is in a great position to be able to use some of its mining heritage and history and expertise and focus it on a whole new industry that will ensure that the UK is less reliant on imports from other parts of the world. I regard it as a huge opportunity for the UK and a responsibility as one of the richest nations in the world because of our past industrialisation and carbon emissions to continue to be at the forefront of this transition. Pretty much everything that we rely on and are used to at some point is based on fossil fuels. Leaders need to be a lot more honest about the scale of the challenge that we have and not try and dress it up in terms of short-term, easy fix stuff. Unfortunately, there seems to be a view that we can carry on more or less the same as we are, with a few small changes and somehow we'll get to net zero. It's not going to happen like that. And one has to consider what the alternatives actually are, and the fossil fuels are running out. So if we don't make this transition, then we end up with a more expensive, less secure, higher polluting situation for longer. I don't see how that serves the country or individual communities.
I've recently got married and I would love to have children one day, but I do worry about our future because we've pushed our climate to the brink. There are no two ways about it. We urgently need to stop burning fossil fuels. We shouldn't underestimate the challenges of overhauling our energy system. It won't be fixed by one simple quick fix solution, but the costs of not acting will be unthinkably worse, especially for people my age and younger. I'm really proud that Cornwall is doing so much to lead the energy transition, but as one of the poorest parts of the country,
we need support to ensure that nobody is left behind. We are going to see huge changes in the coming years, but if we get it right, I think the future could be really exciting.